Today, we're going to dive into the rankings, discuss the future for all fighters, especially the triumphant ones, and make some predictions about what might happen next. We'll also touch on topics unrelated to the recent event or the upcoming one, since this weekend features UFC 312. So, let's get started with the tournament that took place last weekend, covering a bit of the aftermath from UFC Saudi Arabia. The main event featured Adesanya and Imavov. As you recall, Imavov's victory was reflected in the rankings as well. Looking at the middleweight division, Imavov has climbed 3 spots. He was 5th, now he's 2nd, having taken Adesanya's position. Israel remains in the top 5 but has been bumped down a couple of places, now sitting at 4th. Whittaker also dropped to 5th, while Khamzat Chimaev held on to his 3rd spot. We're also seeing some new faces here. Shara Bullet has been completely removed from the rankings after his loss, although to be fair, Shara never secured a win against ranked opponents. Now he's lost again, this time to a fighter from a different weight class. As a result, Shara was cut from the rankings, and in his place, another Russian, Roman Kopylov, has emerged. He's now ranked 14th. Congratulations to Roman on becoming a top-tier fighter. The 15th spot is also a fresh addition, Bo Nickal. Bo is a favorite of Dana White, so it's no surprise he remains undefeated. Michel Pereira jumped up 2 spots thanks to all the recent shakeups, even though his last fight was far from convincing. Shifting to other divisions, let's take a look at the heavyweight category, where it's hard to miss the absence of Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And no, he wasn't just dropped from the rankings, he was actually released. Honestly, I don't know why, because his record doesn't seem to warrant that. Sure, he lost to Pavlovich, but that was his first defeat in his last 3 fights. Before that, he derailed Gaziev's hype and beat Tuivasa. I don't know really. It seems they decided Rozenstruik isn't part of their plans anymore, even though his record doesn't scream release-worthy. In his last 5 fights, he's had 3 wins, with losses only to Pavlovich and Almeida, both top 5 opponents. It doesn't seem like grounds for termination, but perhaps they felt Rozenstruik wasn't adding much to the heavyweight division. Now he's probably heading to either PFL or GFL. Those are the 2 likely options. If I were one championship, I'd jump at the chance to sign him. Malakin's been struggling to find stable opponents, and Rozenstruik could really shake things up there. So one might actually be more interested in Rozenstruik. But anyway, we weren't planning to focus too much on him today. Gaziev has climbed 3 spots, moving from the bottom of the top 15 to the 11th position. Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa have also shifted in the rankings. You can see the details on the table. There's been some movement in the women's divisions as well. That wraps up the key updates regarding the rankings, so now let's shift our focus to the fighters themselves. Nassourdine Imavov is currently experiencing the peak of his career, basking in his moment of glory. He's defeated his most prominent opponent yet, and now everyone is talking about him. Many believe he should be next in line for a title shot, possibly even before Khamzat Chimaev. Dana White has mentioned that theoretically, a title eliminator bout between Chimaev and Imavov could happen, though it's just an idea being floated around for now. It's clear, however, that Khamzat enjoys certain privileges, he's a fan favorite, and his recent, highly publicized win over Whittaker keeps him in the spotlight. Everyone seems eager to see him in a title fight, including Dricus du Plessis, the current champion who often brings up Chimaev in interviews. Even Sean Strickland has admitted that he hates Khamzat, which makes him want to fight him even more, knowing it would come with a hefty paycheck. Realistically, despite all the respect for Imavov, he'll probably have to wait his turn. Looking at the situation objectively, UFC appears keen on positioning Chimaev for a title shot soon. Speaking of which, Dricus du Plessis is set to face Sean Strickland this weekend. Interestingly, du Plessis has openly stated that he preferred fighting Chimaev instead of Strickland, arguing that Sean didn't deserve the shot after his lackluster bout against Costa. Nonetheless, UFC went with Strickland. Du Plessis has also expressed interest in facing Chimaev in his next fight. He's genuinely curious to test himself against Khamzat, given Chimaev's hype and dynamic fighting style. Dricus wants to prove he can handle any opponent, whether a striker or a grappler, and he's not intimidated by Chimaev at all. He's criticized fighters who focus solely on takedown defense when facing Khamzat, calling it a strategic mistake. Du Plessis plans to approach the fight differently. He's ready for anything. If Chimaev wants to grapple, he'll engage him on the ground without hesitation. Dricus is well aware that the first 2 rounds might be tough, but he's confident that he can impose his game plan in the later rounds, expecting Chimaev to struggle with cardio as the fight progresses. That's when Du Plessis believes he'll take control. So Du Plessis is eager to prove himself and is awaiting Chimaev as a future opponent. However, it's still unclear how things will unfold. UFC seems determined to have Chimaev fight for the title against the winner of Du Plessis versus Strickland in the United States. The question remains whether Khamzat can even travel to the US. There's speculation that Donald Trump's friendship with Dana White might help clear any obstacles. If Chimaev had issues before, it's possible they could now be resolved, especially since he holds a second passport. But all of this is still up in the air. For now, we need to see who emerges as the champion after this weekend's fight, whether Du Plessis retains the title or Strickland reclaims it. Imavov is quite a humble guy. All the journalists mentioned how pleasant he is. After his triumph over Adesanya, he went back to the hotel, took time to speak with both fans and the media, and gave everyone his attention. Everyone highlighted how incredibly kind, down-to-earth, and easy to talk to he is. So let's give him some credit just for being a great person, judging by what people say about him. Nasruddin hinted that he's generally okay with waiting for things to settle down until it becomes clear when he'll get his title shot. He's in no rush at the moment. For now, Imavov is in limbo, waiting for updates. As for Adesanya, nothing is clear. It seems like he promised to come back stronger. He didn't say it outright, but he hinted at it. It's frustrating for Adesanya because things seem to be going well. He's rewatched the fight with Imavov 1,000 times. We even saw him watching it in the car after the fight, and then again as soon as he got to the hotel. He's been praising Imavov. And Israel subtly lets us know that we haven't seen the last of him, despite his current rough patch. That's 3 consecutive losses for Israel and 4 defeats in his last 5 fights. Moving on to the co-main event, Paige and Shara Bullet. After the fight, Shara spoke with journalists and shared some details. He had serious gastrointestinal issues, problems with bile flow, pancreas, and intestines. He felt extremely nauseous. After landing 2 or 3 strikes, he'd feel sick. It was tough, and doctors had told him that he needed treatment, that it wouldn't go away quickly, and recovery would take 3 to 4 months. Shara hoped everything would be fine, planning to address his health afterward, but things didn't work out that way. So, there were factors that significantly affected his performance in the fight. Paige, however, wasn't impressed with these explanations. He sarcastically advised Shara, saying, "If you've got issues, better keep them to yourself because it sounds like an excuse." What's next for Paige? He's unsure for now. He just fought a top 115 middleweight but doesn't know whether to stay in this weight class or drop back to welterweight. He's interested in a fight with Leon Edwards in the UK, which means he's open to returning to welterweight to face the former champion. However, Leon already has a fight lined up. I'm not sure if Leon, even with a win, would want to fight Paige, who's ranked much lower while Leon sits at the top. But Paige has another rather bold option. He said, "Since I've moved up to middleweight, I might as well check out light heavyweight." Paige expressed his desire to test himself against Jiri Prochazka, a pretty unexpected decision. But Paige believes it would be an incredibly exciting fight, so he's throwing that idea out there. Who knows how Paige would perform at light heavyweight, but the guy's fearless. Shara Bullet also hinted in an interview that his potential purse for the fight with Michael Page could have been $300,000 if he had won. But since he lost, he likely earned less. We don't know the exact amount, but it's reasonable to assume something like 150 plus 150 or maybe 200 plus 100. Either way, it's clear that Shara's being fairly compensated. By the way, speaking of Imavov, I can't help but mention that there's someone who wants to fight him. Of course, this guy is ranked a bit lower than Imavov himself, and I'm not sure Nasruddin would be particularly interested, but Caio Borralho is ready to take the fight. He's the 6th ranked fighter in the division. Caio is eager to break into the top 5 but hasn't been able to secure fights with anyone from that group yet. He's on an impressive winning streak and remains undefeated in the UFC with a record of 7 wins and 0 losses. Caio was really hoping for a bout with Israel Adesanya, and it seemed like he was counting on the possibility that if Adesanya beat Imavov, he'd get his shot. But that fight isn't on the table now and probably won't be anytime soon. So Borralho, who's currently in Sydney where UFC 312 is taking place, figures it'd be great to face a fresh winner. However, Imavov holds a higher ranking and appears to have the upper hand in terms of status. We'll have to see if they can persuade Imavov to agree to this matchup. As for Borralho, there just aren't many options for him in the top 5. The best case scenario might be a fight against Robert Whittaker, but there hasn't been any news about Whittaker's return yet. If it ends up being Imavov, that would be the perfect scenario for Borralho. He believes he already knows how to beat him, thinks the first couple of rounds would be competitive, but then Imavov would slow down, and Borralho could start applying pressure, becoming a real problem for him. Still, after Imavov's last fight, Caio realized he should be wary of Nassourdin's powerful striking. So when it comes to stand-up exchanges, he plans to be more cautious. Borralho is also in Sydney, attending the event. Interestingly, he's been sparring with Sean Strickland. He's pulled Strickland and the Topuria brothers into his crew of fight nerds, as they like to call themselves. Caio's got that upbeat, friendly vibe. Hard to say no to a guy like that. Speaking of recent events, there was a last-minute cancellation of a middleweight bout between Aliskerov and Muniz on the last card. Turns out the fight's been rescheduled for the 26th of April, with the same matchup just a couple of months later. Almost 3, actually. It'll be interesting to see if Khamzat Chimaev shows up at UFC 312. There was news that he'd be flying in as well. As you can see, quite a crowd is gathering for this event. Not just Australians, but fighters and teams traveling from afar. Chimaev actually had an Australian tour planned, supposed to kick off in Sydney on February 8th, which falls on a Saturday. I'm not sure if that's still happening or if it's been cancelled. If he does show up, we'll see a lot of top middleweights at this event, alongside Dricus and Strickland. Briefly touching on other news as well, this week there's been a lot of talk about a rumor suggesting that a fight between Makhachev and Topuria might take place at UFC 314 in April. I have no idea where these rumors originated, but it's all fake. Even Georgian journalists have already reported that such fights are definitely not planned for Topuria at the moment. It was pretty clear anyway, considering that after a full month of Ramadan, Makhachev would hardly be ready to fight on short notice. He himself mentioned different timelines, speaking about June or July, but definitely not April. So there's no point in expecting this bout. Carlos Prates, who made a lot of noise in the UFC last year with a streak of knockouts, broke into the rankings and everyone started talking about him. However, we also remember that at the end of last year, he made it clear he needed a break. He fought too often, so he planned to rest until the beginning of 2025. Well, he's had his break, it's already February, and Carlos Prates is looking for an opponent, asking the UFC to arrange a fight for him. Jiří Procházka clarified whom he'd like to face in his next fight. Naturally, he's interested in fighting Alex Pereira, but Pereira himself adds fuel to the fire, saying that after Ankalaev, he's ready to fight Procházka again. If not Pereira, then Procházka is interested in someone like Ankalaev, though it's unclear what will happen if Ankalaev wins in March, or even if he loses. He's also intrigued by Jan Blachowicz. Procházka finds it interesting to test himself against him since Blachowicz gave Pereira a tough fight. In fact, Blachowicz believes he won that bout. Sean Strickland has been poking fun at Khabib, saying the airline that kicked him off their flight did the right thing because Khabib wouldn't have helped anyone if something went wrong. Like if a woman needed assistance during an evacuation, he wouldn't have touched her. And if someone nearby was eating a pork chop, Khabib wouldn't have approached them either. So Strickland thinks it was the right call to remove him since he wouldn't have been any help to anyone. Zabit Magomedsharipov is still in good shape, occasionally delighting his followers by showing he hasn't lost his skills. Muhammad Mokaev in an interview reiterated that he still has a chance to return to the UFC, despite Dana White stating at a recent press conference that Mokaev could become a champion in any other league, but not in the UFC. They're not interested in him. According to Makhachev, Dana is unaware that he's already in talks with Hunter Campbell and that everything seems fine. There's news suggesting he might return soon, but Dana appears to be out of the loop on this. The former Bellator champion, since the organization no longer exists, Patchy Mix, who's on a 7-fight winning streak, is considered one of the most talented bantamweights in the world. Especially outside the UFC, he's arguably the best fighter in this weight class globally. Like many other former Bellator champions and stars, he's frustrated and keeps repeating the same issues others have mentioned. No fights are being offered. There are problems with negotiations. He doesn't want to fight under these conditions. He wants proper matchups, preferably in other promotions. He's asking to be released from his PFL contract because he doesn't want to compete there. Clearly, there are issues with this organization since they seem to clash with nearly every Bellator star, and it's hard to find any logic behind it. Vadim Nemkov was reportedly preparing to leave, but recently, PFL's Vice President Mike Kogan mentioned in an interview that, no, Nemkov isn't going anywhere because his contract runs through the end of 2025. Some time has passed and Nemkov's team has now confirmed that his contract indeed extends until the end of 2025. Initially, they thought it would expire at the end of 2024. Then, they believed that his fight against Timothy Johnson would be the last under his contract. However, it seems there were some tricky clauses they didn't fully understand, and the contract automatically extended. As a result, for the next year, Nemkov will be competing only within the same league, and he's not even allowed to negotiate with anyone else. Rafael Fiziev is facing some issues. He recently shared that he accepted 4 fights over the past 6 months, was ready for all of them, yet none of the bouts materialized. He's grown tired of sitting around and waiting. Dana White responded, saying this sounds like complete nonsense. However, he admitted he's not fully aware of the situation and believes it's unlikely to be exactly as Fiziev described. Most likely, the situation is far more complicated than it appears at first glance. As for Conor McGregor, as usual, he's up to his antics, partying, showing off, and bragging that Diplo, the DJ, is a close friend of his. They partied all night long as always, but before heading to the party, Conor managed to get into an argument with a fan, a Khabib supporter, who shouted, "Let's go, Khabib," in a hotel lobby. Conor walked over and spat in his face, saying, "And what are you going to do about it?" That's how Conor McGregor tries to assert dominance in everyday life. There's really nothing more to discuss here. You can judge his behavior for yourselves.